Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you 3 cards I've made using the Basil Basics 6-inch paper pad. Paper pad is called Timeless and this is part of my kit from Kraft Supplies for You. There will be a link in the description box below to their store. Each of my cards are 5 1/4 inches square and I have made the card bases out of white cardstock. I've cut each piece 10 and a half by 5 1/4. My first card is a gatefold card, so I'm scoring that at 2 5/8 and 7 7/8, then folding the 2 outside edges in towards the centre. With the other cards that I've created, they are just a plain normal fold and I score them at 5 1/4 and fold them in half. As I said, I'm going to be using Basil Basics 6-inch paper pad called Timeless, and that's this pad. I selected this stripe pattern paper from the pad and I'm going to cut 2 pieces of this. They're going to measure 2 3/8 inches by 5 inches. Because these are masculine cards, I'm sort of going to grunge them up a little bit, so I'm going to use the Distress ink in Vintage Photo to just ink around the edges of each of the pattern papers using my blending tool. I'll do this on every card. I'm going to use double-sided tape to attach these to the front of my card. I want to make 3 pieces to go across the front of my card, so I'm going to cut 3 pieces of white cardstock that are 1 1/4 inches by 3 1/2 inches. Once I've got those 3 pieces, I'm going to cut a fishtail into one end of each piece. I'm going to cut back 3/4 of an inch on each one. I chose another pattern paper from my pad and I cut 3 pieces that were 1 inch by 3 1/4 inches. I cut a corresponding fishtail in one end of each of these. It was 1/2 an inch I cut in, not 3/4 of an inch. I used my Vintage Photo ink to ink around both the pattern paper and the white cardstock. Using my art glitter glue, I attached the pattern paper centrally on top of the plain white banners. Time now to stick them to the front of my card, making sure to only apply the glue to half of the banner so that we're still able to open the card. I chose another piece the same as what I had used on the front of the card, so another piece of pattern paper, and I've trimmed that down to 5 inches square and I'm going to use my glue to attach that to the inside of the card. To create a panel to hold my greeting, I cut a piece of white cardstock 3/4 of an inch by 2 7/8 of an inch and cut a fishtail into the end of that. After I'd inked around the edge of that, I used my glue to attach it on top of the centre banner of my card. To create my greeting, I'm going to use this woodware stamp called Word Fragments. I'm going to stamp the Happy Birthday onto that white piece of cardstock that I've just attached to the card. I'm going to use my Tim Holtz platform to do that. And that completes our first card for today. On to our second card. As I said, this is 5 1/4 inches square. I trimmed my first piece of pattern paper down to 5 1/8 inches square. Next, I cut a piece of white cardstock 4 7/8 inches square. These are going down in very small increments because I only want a small border around each level. My next layer of pattern paper is 4 3/4 inches square. I lost the footage of this next step, but I made an envelope out of some of the pattern paper. I cut a 5-inch square and then I used my We Are Memory Keepers envelope punch board to create the envelope. I just followed the instructions on the board and I ended up with this nice little envelope that's about 2 inches by 3 inches, or 2.5 inches by 3 inches. That gives me all of the layers for the front of my card. For a little bit extra on this card, I'm going to use my distress tool, and I'm going to distress the edges of all of the papers before I ink them with the vintage photo ink. So once I had those papers prepared, I attached my background paper to my card base, and then I attached the smallest pattern paper to the white cardstock. Before I attach my top layers to my card base, I wanted to add some brads. So I want to put a little black brad in each corner of this top layer. I'm going to use my paper piercer, and I'm going to put the hole in, pushing it into a stubby holder that I've cut open, just for a bit of padding so that my paper piercer goes through nicely. And I'm going to add my 4 brads. I wanted to add a bit of colour to this, so I've got this burlap roll and in a blue, sort of like a turquoisey blue. So I'm going to cut a piece of that to fit onto the background, or well, on top of the smallest layer on my layers. I'm going to cut it where I want it, and then I'm going to fray a bit out the edges so that the edge that I've cut looks exactly the same as the other 3 edges. I'm going to use my hot glue gun to stick this in place. I'm just going to apply a bit onto the centre of the front panel and then put my burlap down on top of it. While I've got my heat gun handy, I also attach the little handmade envelope on top of the burlap, and then I attach that whole panel to the front of my card. Now I'm going to create a panel to hold my greeting. I've used my Spellbinders Labels 1 and cut one of those, about the 3rd size up I think, out of some white cardstock. I have a sheet of greetings that I keep handy that I've already printed out, and I'm going to use one of those. I'm going to ink around the panel that I created to hold the greeting, and I'm going to trim the greeting down to the size I want and ink around the edge of that. Then I'll use my glue to attach the greeting to the little panel that I made to hold it. That will sit inside of my little envelope. I had thought I'd leave it loose and it could be taken in and out, but it wobbled around too much, so I attached it with a little dab of glue. So there we have our second card. Now for card number 3. For this card I decided to incorporate some black. So I cut a piece of black cardstock that was 5 1/4 inches square, and this will be attached to the front of my white card base. The pattern paper to go on top of the black square is 5 1/8. I cut my next layer of pattern paper so that it's 4 1/8 inches square, and then I cut a piece of black cardstock to sit behind that is 4 1/4 inches square. Once again, I inked around the edge of my pattern papers with the vintage photo distress ink. Time now to attach my pattern papers to my black cardstock. I use my art glitter glue to do that. I like the look of the brads on the previous card, so I decided to add brads to this one as well. I had an offcut of the black card that measured 4 1/4 by 2 inches, so I decided to use that across the front panel. I had a look in my stash and I found these fibres that match perfectly with the colours of this card. So I'm going to wrap them around that black panel 3 times and secure them at the back. Because of the fibres, I used my glue to attach that little panel to the front of the smallest panel that's going to go on the front of the card. I used my Spellbinders standard circles to cut a black circle that's about 2.5 inches in diameter and a pattern paper that's about 2 3/8 inches in diameter. I inked around the edge of the pattern paper one, and then I attached the pattern paper on top of the black, and then attached foam to the back of the circle. For my greeting, I used another one of my computer printout greetings. I trimmed that down to size, ran over it with a light coat of the vintage photo ink, and then attached it to a piece of black cardstock, trimmed it down so they had a very fine 1/16 of an inch border all around. I wanted to make 3 small pennants for this card, so I cut one piece of pattern paper that was 5/8 of an inch wide, and I cut it 3 pieces at 1 inch long. I cut a fishtail in each end, and then I attached them to a strip of black cardstock that had a very fine border all around, and cut the fishtail into the black. I used my glue to attach them to the circle on the card, so they are varying heights, and then I attached the greeting so that it covered up the top section of the pennants. Oh, I forgot to say that I did attach some craft foam to the back of the greeting so that it stood up from the pennants. I used glue to attach the small front panel to the card and also the greeting circle on top of the fibres. Time now to attach my assembly to my card base. I'm going to use my art glitter glue to do that. The circle with the greeting on it was having trouble sticking to those fibres with the glue, so I got my hot glue gun out and used that to attach that greeting circle to the fibres. I thought I would add a little something to the inside of the card, so I had a scrap of pattern paper left over that was 1.25 inches wide. I trimmed that down to 5.25 inches long, then matted that on a piece of black cardstock that was 1.5 inches wide, and then attached that to the inside of the card. So that's all of our cards for today. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. The links to Kraft Supplies for you will be in the description box below, so pop over and check out their store. They've got heaps and heaps of beautiful things over there. Yeah, if you're not already a subscriber to my channel, I'd love it if you would subscribe. If you select the notification button next to the subscribe button and select all, you'll be notified when I upload each new video. Once again, thank you for being here with me today, and I hope you can join me for my next video.